So today's session, Effective Crowdfunding for CED, is brought to you by the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. We're a national network of several hundred community organizations and individuals working to create local economic opportunities that support an inclusive and sustainable economy. Here you can see a few of our member logos. Our members are spread out all across the country. Last fall we launched a new website member map, which you can access by following the link indicated there, and identify or find members close to you. If you'd like the session today, consider joining us by becoming a member, signing up for our free e-newsletters, or following us on social media. CEDNet's done a number of webinars like this one in recent years. Here you can see some of the topics that we've covered. All of these are available on our website, and they're free for members. So allow me to welcome you again. In the absence of a webcam, there's a photo of me. And today's webinar is divided into two parts. To start, we'll have a presentation by Christy and Carlos that will last between 30 and 40 minutes. And then for the remaining time, I'll ask them the questions that you will have posed in the chat box. Once again, you should feel free to post those questions, comments, or any other information you'd like to share in the chat box at any time. But before we get into the introduction for the session, let's get to know each other a bit better with two quick polls here. You should see these polls pop up on your screen, and you can check off how familiar you are and your involvement in crowdfunding campaigns, as well as whether you are or have plans to become involved in different types of crowdfunding activities. And while you answer, I'm going to do a quick introduction for the session. Crowdfunding is a growing, relatively new and growing strategy for financing a variety of initiatives, from small-scale support needed for specific projects or initiatives to larger startup capital for small or medium-sized enterprises. It can tap into your organization's existing fan base, and it can help you access investors who are interested in your idea. Now, because access to funding and investment is a perennial challenge for groups involved in community economic development and the social economy, we wanted to have a session that would introduce the different types of crowdfunding models that exist and get up to date on the status of equity crowdfunding regulations in Canada. So we're very happy to have Christy and Carlos with us today, but before I introduce Christy, let's just have a look at our poll results. It looks like the majority of people are familiar with the crowdfunding platforms, and maybe a third of our participants have previously contributed to a crowdfunding campaign. Only a couple of people have been running them. And here again, there are some people who are already or plans to become a crowdfunding issuer. So it's mostly on the demand side of the social finance equation. I have projects that would be looking for funding or investment. There's a few here that have possibly becoming an investor, service providers, and some others who are typing a message in the chat box. All right. So, sounds like a diverse crowd. Welcome, everyone. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Christy Electris. Christy is a founding team member at Crowdfunding Institute, a new center for advanced social and environmental research and engagement focusing on the nexus of sustainability and finance. She also holds a dual appointment with the TELUS Institute, a sustainability think tank in Boston, and consults on a wide variety of environmental and social issues. Now, as part of the Ford Foundation-funded WealthWorks Rural Development Program, she studied enterprise finance models and place-based investing across the country, and out of that work developed and conducted several trainings on crowdfunding to support new investment in place-based rural value chains, which is the basis for what she's going to present to us today. Thank you for joining us, Christy.
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to talk with you all about my experience with the crowdfunding trainings that I've done. Most recently was a crowdfunding action learning program that we ran for the WealthWorks development community that Michael began to introduce there. So crowdfunding is a very powerful financing tool for rural value chains with a variety of stakeholders. It's ideal for enterprises that are in the early and seed stages of investment readiness and who are trying to raise small to medium amounts of money. However, developing and launching a crowdfunding campaign takes a lot of time, commitment, energy, and resources, a strong supporting network, marketing, and technological knowledge, and much more. Many nonprofits and business owners are in need of this useful form of capital to support their new projects that will add value to their communities, but they often lack the necessary experience and expertise with the tools to develop a campaign on their own. I don't need to give you much introduction, but I will point out that the institute that I'm working with is based in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm personally based up in Boston. And just to give you a sense, I don't have a deep experience in the Canadian market, and that will be great that Carlos will be able to give you some more understanding on that. But most of what I say is applicable to the Canadian experience as well. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the WealthWorks model for community economic development, and then I'll introduce crowdfunding. It does seem like most of the participants today have a basic understanding, but I'll review it a little bit. And then I'll spotlight one of the campaigns that was successful in our Action Learning program last summer. Organizations across the United States are experimenting with new and better approaches to regional economic development. Rural communities, places in the Deep South, in Appalachia, and in the Rio Grande Valley and the Pacific Northwest are helping to lead the field in innovation. They're innovating across sectors in forestry products, food systems, tourism, manufacturing, housing developments, biofuels, and energy efficiency. And many of these innovators are using the WealthWorks model, one way of doing economic development better. It's a 21st century approach to local and regional economic development that brings together and connects the community's assets to meet the market demand in ways that build livelihoods that last. And it can work for everyone, people, firms, places of all sizes, shapes, and success levels. The goal for WealthWorks is to build wealth that sticks by investing and building in 8 capitals, which I'll show you in the next slide, by expanding local ownership and control of the wealth in a region's people, places, or firms, and by increasing the livelihoods of people, places, and firms in the region, including moving those on the economic margins towards the mainstream. WealthWorks' definition of wealth building starts with the core belief that every place has wealth, even if it's not currently in use, that wealth can be identified, deployed, and increased to improve the lives of residents. So this is a list of the 8 forms of capital that WealthWorks uses: individual, intellectual, social, cultural, natural, built, political, and financial. All of these are required to grow and sustain a healthy economy over the long term, and the WealthWorks framework uses these capitals for assessment, planning, and to track results. A key concept for WealthWorks is the value chain system. It's different than a supply chain. It is demand-driven, and it connects, it's a coordinated network of people, businesses, organizations, and agencies. It allows a framework for identifying the opportunities and leverage points. And one thing that came out of this work is that value chains do not self-organize. A coordinating role is necessary to really be able to hold and steward the vision of the value chain, to build relationships among and between partners in the value chain, to guide activities and partnerships and build multiple forms of capital, and ensure that low-income people, firms, and places participate and benefit. The value chain coordinator can also help create and deploy structures to manage risk, maintain flows of information to keep the mutual benefit going, and is really able to help identify the gaps and bottlenecks and secure ongoing investment. So I originally got involved in the WealthWorks initiative through a project called Accelerating Impact, which was looking to help value chain coordinators assess the best tools and approaches for attracting funds and investments. At the end of this talk, I'll point you to some resources and tools that came out of that project if you're interested in learning more, including a report on enterprise financing for WealthWorks value chains, which is applicable even if you're not using that framework. Through that project, though, we found that enterprise finance is critical. However, the traditional sources of capital, such as family funding, bank lending, and venture capital, are often unavailable for projects and enterprises in low-wealth areas. We termed that the emerging approaches that bring a greater likelihood of success as stakeholder financing approaches. They're about obtaining capital from those who have a stake in a project's success because they share common aims, such as a commitment to community benefit and the common good. Stakeholder investors might be part of the value chain and want to see it succeed. They might be local and care about the region, or they might be interested in socially responsible and ecologically sustainable projects because stakeholder investors care about the same benefits as the value chain produces. They have non-financial, values-based reasons to invest, and that makes them potentially more accessible, more willing to invest on friendly terms, and stickier or less likely to flee and give up when value chains hit a rough spot. At different stages of an enterprise's life cycle, different kinds of stakeholder approaches can come into play. At the seed stage, an enterprise is ready for only limited kinds of stakeholder investments, such as philanthropic funding and crowdfunding, or friends and family. And as it enters the emerging stage, finding its legs and becoming more sophisticated, developing a track record, it's ready for different kinds of investment and becomes eligible for loans or from a community loan fund, or ready for something like slow money, or maybe local angel investors. At growth stage, impact investors or direct public offerings become an option, and at scale, all of the same apply as well. So after reviewing many of the WealthWorks value chains in our project across the United States, we found that many of them were in the category of donations for what they needed, rather than the category of formal investments that offer return to investors. And we saw crowdfunding as a potentially valuable tool for those who couldn't go after foundation dollars, and there's a lack of them these days, as well as an oversubscription to government dollars. So I want to emphasize that there's a continuum of funding. One thing sets you up for the next. Crowdfunding is not the answer to everything or for everyone, but we'll talk about what it's appropriate for. And it could be one step towards readiness for other kinds of funding, including loans and possibly equity. So what is crowdfunding? Go over just some of the basics here. Crowdfunding essentially is the use of small amounts of capital from many individuals to finance a project. What makes it different, though, than just going door to door is the online platform that brings it all together and makes it kind of easy to share with other people and make the crowd larger. So it relies a lot on social media connections, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Crowdfunding is used to support a wide variety of activities, including nonprofits, for-profits, support of artists, disaster relief, citizen journalism, political campaigns, startup funding. Many people have heard about the software development and inventions development. Scientific research is a new area that's really expanding. Civic projects, and more agriculture and food projects have been depending on crowdfunding to get started. In the U.S., and I believe it's the same in Canada, there are essentially three types of crowdfunding. There is donations-based crowdfunding, where you give a donation, and it could be purely donation, and a lot of causes will raise money for kind of like a charity will raise money in a crowdfunding manner. But more and more people are getting used to this donation reward model, where you give money and you get something in return. Sometimes it's a pre-purchase, So there's a cool technology or a new food product company that's getting started, and you give a donation, you get something back in return for that donation. Or it could be a t-shirt, something like that. The second type is loans, lending, or debt. Now, it kind of breaks into two sides. There's interest-free loans, which are usually unregulated, and then there's regulated, at least in the U.S. market, the interest-bearing loans that is only allowed currently for accredited investors. And then the third type of crowdfunding is the equity. And so equity is purchasing ownership shares in a business, and I'm not going to talk about that, but Carlos will speak about equity crowdfunding and specifically to the Canadian situation. In the U.S., only the first two, the donation rewards and then the interest-free loans, are available to our non-accredited investors. Now, there are hundreds of platforms available for across these three types of crowdfunding. I'm going to focus on the donation reward models, and there's essentially two models there. There's an all or nothing, where you fundraise for a goal, and if you don't meet that goal, you don't have to pay, give the rewards out. You're not expected to complete the project. And then there's a flexible funding model, which is something like Indiegogo. So Kickstarter is all or nothing. Indiegogo gives you the option. You can do it all or nothing, or you can do it on the flexible funding side. And that means that even if you don't reach your goal, you still can take whatever money you did raise, although you may pay a higher fee for that. There are many pros and cons of crowdfunding. Again, focusing on the donation reward model. So you have the ability to reach a large number of people, and you're sort of advertising whatever it is you're trying to create, whether it's a new project, economic development project, whether it's a specific business in your value chain. So you're advertising this out to a large number of people. And in a way, it's free money. You're not asked to pay the money back, although it's not really free because you're putting a lot of time and effort into doing this campaign. You can raise funds more than your goal. So you put a conservative goal, and if you do really hit a chord among your community, you can go beyond that. If you don't hit your goal, if you do an all or nothing campaign, you don't owe any rewards. So it's almost like you're testing the market. And you get to keep 100% ownership of your work. You're not giving away any equity stakes of your business. But some people don't really realize how much work it can take to run a successful campaign. If you do go the rewards route, it could take, the fees and the rewards themselves can take a third of the funds that you raise, and you're using your staff time, unless it's a volunteer, you're using staff time even if you fail. That needs to be accounted for somehow. And something that's usually more a concern for people with a kind of a intellectual property issue, but you're openly sharing your idea with the world. So if it's a business idea that you don't want to share yet, you're putting it out there, you're telling everyone about it, you're giving a lot of information about what you want to do. And moreover, if it doesn't succeed, your campaign stays on, at least on the most platforms that I've seen, the idea stays up there. So whether it's funded or unfunded, people can still find it and search for it. And so some people don't like the idea of having, an unsuccessful campaign memorialized online. So what are the statistics of success? As of, I think, a couple days ago, 39% of all Kickstarter projects that have launched have succeeded. Now, Kickstarter is one of the most popular platforms out there. It has a lot of name recognition these days. But again, that means 61% have failed, and I've given this talk several times, and the percentage of how many have succeeded is slowly going down because more and more people are using the platform. But the rule of thumb is that smaller projects tend to be more successful. Because we focus a lot on food projects with our value chains, many of the rural value chains dealt in one way or another with food, we saw that the food project sweet spot was around $5,000 to $15,000, and they tended to be larger than some of the other types of projects. So even 20% were in the 20 to 100,000. So there's a lot of information about how to run a successful campaign. This is a short list of some of the keys to success. And you can look at the additional information that we're going to give you, and you can get a whole download of how to plan for a successful campaign. We've created some worksheets and things like that, so you can download that for free. So I'm not going to go into this too much right now. So crowdfunding to support a value chain. The idea is that a particular value chain, a business within a value chain may need extra funds for startup or to grow to the next stage. So for example, farmers may need better tools to grow more on their land, or you may want to prove a business concept or demand, or prove that there's demand in order to unlock traditional financing. There may also be a crucial piece of infrastructure equipment that's missing in the value chain. So one example is, there was a group of farmers that needed extra farm hands, and the labor existed, but the labor didn't have transportation to get to the farm. So they were considering, can we raise money for a van to get the farmers to the land so that they can help us harvest and prepare the land and so forth, so that we can unlock more of our land, because right now we can't work it all. There's also a huge opportunity to improve the cohesiveness of your value chain by campaigning and advertising together. So again, you have all those stakeholders that start to see that they have a common interest in seeing the whole value chain succeed, not just their personal business or their personal, area. So that's the idea, that if you start seeing it together, maybe you'll start improving the cohesiveness of even raising money together, because you see that one missing link could unlock the benefits for everyone. So to focus in on one of the campaigns that we spotlighted, and for concerns of time, we're not going to be playing the video, but I encourage you to go and check out the video that goes with this crowdfunding campaign. It's the Black Belt Treasures Community Arts Center. It's a nonprofit located in Alabama's Black Belt region, about 120 miles north of the Gulf Coast. And their mission is to preserve the region's unique arts and crafts heritage. And they are a value chain coordinator, WealthWorks value chain coordinator. And so they're focused on economic development as well, not just their cultural heritage, but all 8 forms of wealth. And therefore, they're helping their community members earn a living making and selling art. They also have classes, and they involve the community in many ways. So some of the areas of wealth that they're focusing on, the intellectual, individual, social, cultural, financial. They're also really interested in increasing the tourism sector. Black Belt is well known for their pottery and also their quilters. The Gee's Belt quilting is in that area. Some people may be familiar with the Gee's Belt quilts, Gee's Bend quilts. And it's a really unique area, and also a very economically depressed area in general. So they decided they needed to fill one of their gaps, which was the build capital. They saw that there was a lack of studio space and equipment in the area for their artists. The materials were also hard to come by, and they wanted to see if they could fill this gap by building a pottery station that could help educate and train community members and artists, allow the artists to produce art locally and expand their portfolio, and also engage community members and tourists where they can to interact with artists and purchase art. So the campaign was to build this pottery station. Their goal was for $10,000 to do phase 1 renovations. They didn't decide to be conservative and not try to raise the full amount of their ideal scenario because they didn't want to discourage people by making it too high of an ask. But it's still pretty ambitious at $10,000 for this region of the U.S. So they have an auto body shop. The Black Belt Cultural Arts Center is kind of like a shop that sells different products from different artists in the community, and they have gallery showings and things like that. So they already had the space, but it's this old auto body shop. But they needed to convert it and buy the equipment. So they gave themselves 60 days, which is a little long. The average for crowdfunding campaigns is about 30. But they felt they needed that extra time to get going. They had 61 backers online, and they realized that many of their community didn't feel super comfortable donating online, and they wanted to come in the store and visit and see what was going on. So they ended up getting over half of their donations through in-person donations. So their online site will forever say that they didn't reach their full goal, but because they did a flexible funding campaign, they received all those funds, and they got local community members, friends, artists, and people through the WealthWorks network across the country to donate. And the rewards will be, actually, I donated, I have to admit, so I just got some of this, the arts postcards, prints, and future art from pottery stations. So I'm still waiting for my I think a mug I was going to get in return. So, and the money that people have donated will go towards the equipment and materials. So the equipment that they're putting in there will go to building those rewards. So their learnings and our learnings from this action learning program. Campaigns take a lot of work. You need to plan to launch when people can really be focused on it for the duration of the campaign. They actually found that they were traveling through part of it. They had it really long. 60 days is a long time to be really active campaigning, so they wish they had maybe done it a little bit shorter and had more time to focus on it. It's also important to have multiple people on those campaigns. Creative ways to encourage participation work. So they did a change challenge where they asked people to drop off their loose change or just see what change you have in your pocket and donate it online. They also did a student spotlight, where they highlighted one girl who goes in and takes classes, and she tells her story of how she wants to become a potter when she grows up. Well, that brought in a whole slew of additional donations from the people that, either knew that girl, whether they're friends and family of her, or just a touching story that connected with people. And then it's really an opportunity to connect with many fans by calling them to action. So they found that many people didn't know what they were up to in the last few years. They had, they were still on their email list, but they weren't really paying attention. But when all of a sudden they were asked to do something, new volunteers surfaced. Everyone said, hey, when you start that, we'll come and volunteer. We're going to help with this pottery station. Someone donated some of the equipment they needed. They had drying racks that they weren't using, and they donated them. So it brought new people in the door, and they found that it was a great opportunity to gain exposure to an even wider audience in the community. They also found that the social media and video making experience was useful well beyond the campaign. So they got a different type of capital, if you will, from doing the process of running a crowdfunding campaign. And they had planned to continue making videos and communicating with their networks more often. So here I'm just holding up some of the resources. We have a lot more information about WealthWorks, and please be in touch with me if you have questions on that approach. and I can point you to more. But we have specifically the enterprise financing for WealthWorks Value Chain, financing the evolving role of the Value Chain Coordinator report. And then there's a forthcoming piece that will be about place-based investment for resilient rural development. It's supposed to come out in the next couple months. And then there's a few pieces on crowdfunding that can help you get started.
Super. Thank you very much, Christy. That was a fabulous introduction to crowdfunding and also the advantages of embedding a particular project or campaign in a broader community development or CED strategy, as well as the potential for engaging the broader community in that process. It's as much a fundraising campaign as it is an engagement, promotion, a relationship building campaign. You mentioned the different types of capital. So that's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'll just remind people on the webinar that you're welcome to post questions anytime in the chat box, and we'll come back to them during the Q&A. You don't need to jot them down or keep them in your mind for later on. So now I'm pleased to introduce Carlos Pinto-Lobo. He's currently the SVX Compliance Officer with the Mars Center for Impact Investing in Toronto. He's an accomplished compliance, governance, and risk management professional with previous roles as a director and VP at CIBC, Deutsche Bank, Alpha ATS, and BMO InvestorLine. Most recently, he just finished organizing the 2015 Canadian Crowdfunding Summit that took place last week in Toronto to great acclaim, I've heard. So congratulations on that, Carlos, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much for that introduction as well, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Now, how do I control this?
You have to click on that.
Yep, I know. I'm a complete moron when it comes to technology. My apologies. So quick, I'm going to try. We've got a lot to talk about, and I'm going to whip through this as fast as possible. So bear with me if I speak a bit fast. We're going to do a quick introduction to the SVX, then talk about Canada's equity crowdfunding regulatory environment and what possibly lies ahead. I work at, as Mike pointed out, at the Mars Discovery District in Toronto, and Mars is one of Canada's largest innovation hubs focused on incubating high-impact ventures from the ground on up. One of the divisions within Mars is the Mars Center for Impact Investing, which focuses on solutions to the social and environmental challenges we're faced with today. And under the leadership of both those groups and in close collaboration with our co-founder at the Toronto Stock Exchange, the SVX, or the Social Venture Connection with an X, was developed. And the reason we had to call ourselves the Connection with an X was because the Ontario Securities Commission thought if we called ourselves the Exchange, people might confuse us for the Toronto Stock Exchange. It's hard to imagine, but there it is.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, one day. What you're seeing on that next slide is the SVX actually launching at the Toronto Stock Exchange on September 19, 2013. And it is an impact investing platform which connects impact ventures, funds, and to investors and service providers in order to raise capital via equity or debt instruments that generate a social and or environmental impact alongside the potential for financial returns. And Judy, I noticed that you were on here. Judy is part of SolarShare, and SolarShare was one of our original clients on the SVX. They were one of the original 12. Before I go to this slide, for an increasing number of social entrepreneurs, achieving impact at scale requires that they identify groups of underserved customers with different levels of purchasing power and adapt their business models accordingly. These innovators and their funders are finding that these extensions of their offerings can result in multiple kinds of capital and offer a pathway, if you will, to greater financial sustainability. But a problem that occurs is that these issuers don't have the ability to reach out to larger groups of customers. The investors on the other side don't know how to assess if the issuer is worthwhile. They don't understand impact investments, all of that sort of stuff. So this is where the SVX becomes the solution to those type of problems. It's the first of its kind platform in North America. I'm going to go and say it's the world, because other similar platforms around the world focus only on listed companies, whereas the SVX focuses first on established private companies who wish to raise anywhere between $25,000 to $10 million in investment capital. You can go higher in that range if you're an investment fund. To do this, the OSC gave us, and the AMF now, have granted us a restricted dealer status, and we're looking to expand into BC. I'm in negotiations with them. We're expanding in California, Mexico. We've had contact from New Zealand, the UK, and Spain, and parts of Africa. As I said earlier, the SVX is a single point of access for investors. This leads to a diverse range of impact investing opportunities, and for issuers, it can give them a reach into a larger group of willing investors. Our services are available at a very low annual cost, and this reduces the cost to operate, the cost to do due diligence, and the cost of a transaction. And for investors, the access to the platform is free. And finally, the SVX is an independent, values-driven, not-for-profit organization which is committed to supporting and enabling the growth of impact investments in order to benefit social, environmental, and economic growth.
But just to clarify, Carlos, OSC is Ontario and AMF is?
The OSC, sorry, my bad. The OSC is the Ontario Securities Commission. The AMF is the Quebec Securities Commission.
Quebec. Thank you.
Okay. And as I said, I've been working with the BC Securities Commission. So let's take a quick look over the Canadian backstory and equity crowdfunding. It's similar to what Christy alluded to earlier for the U.S. For the past 3 years, there have been increasing calls for securities regulators to change the way the public access private equity deals by purchasing them on the internet. In the States, it was the Jobs Act. Here it was launched shortly after the Jobs Act, and the hype was that it would be ready at the end of 2012. Well, here we are in 2015, and there is still nothing happening in either country. Nothing palpable, at least. However, in December 2013, the Saskatchewan Financial and Consumer Affairs Authority, or FCAA, adopted in their jurisdiction a crowdfunding model aimed at startups in their province. That was December 2013. It's now March 2015. They haven't launched a single thing. In March of last year, 7 Canadian securities regulators published for comments new private placement securities exemptions, including the crowdfunding one. And I wrote the comment for Mars and submitted it in June. I'm not going to go through all of this. In those securities exemptions, 2 of them are crowdfunding specific. One is the startup crowdfunding exemption, which I mentioned was available in Saskatchewan and other provinces. And the one that the Ontario Securities Commission is pushing is the integrated crowdfunding exemption. So before we go there, let's take a look at some of the sacred cows that you're going to hear if you're at all involved in this field, and I hear these things all the time from both the regulators and other portals and potential issuers. I hear that equity crowdfunding is a means of democratization of the way the public access private equity deals. Democracy, as far as I'm concerned, means the power is vested in the people who decide either directly or through representatives. No such thing is happening here. The regulators have gone off and they are talking amongst themselves. Every once in a while they reach out to people like me to talk to them, but you, the public, have no choice in what's going to happen. It's going to happen depending on what they think and at their pace. From the regulators, I hear we're at the intersection of technology and something or other. They put in whatever word you want in that last bit. This is nonsense, and I tell them this all the time. The intersection between technology and whatever, we reached that intersection and went through it 15 years ago. I know because I was the chief compliance officer for BMO Investment, which was a discount brokerage. So everything that the regulators are afraid of, we dealt with back in the 1990s. One of the other things that they're deeply concerned about is fraud. And so the people that are behind crowdfunding says the crowd will always provide necessary protection for fraud. And this is nonsense, again, because being a chief compliance officer, I know that if somebody's out to deceive you, they will. And one of the biggest enablers of fraud are the media, because they're looking for quick sound bites to get things out. So they'll publish something very quickly to fill the space. People read it and buy into it, and next thing you know, you've got people losing money. So moving on from there, what's the main fact? When you strip away everything that everybody talks about, you get to the point that the most important truth is that the ability to access private equity deals will be available to potentially every individual and no longer be reserved for those investors who meet the regulators' existing definition of wealthy or sophisticated. It's come to the point that the regulators are even starting to redefine what they consider wealthy and sophisticated. As I said, there are these are the two models, the startup crowdfunding exemption and the integrated crowdfunding exemption. Let's take a look at how significantly different these are. Now, my next two slides are extremely tech-heavy. I am not going to go into any detail because, as Matthew and Mike said, that these slides will be available. But what I wanted to point out were the three things. First is the offering size in the integrated model is 1.5 million. In the startup model, it's currently pegged at 150,000, and you can do this twice a year. From talks with the BC Securities Commission, they're looking to raise that to 500,000, but it's not definite yet. You notice the audits in the integrated model, you need to be audited or have reviewed statements. In the startup model, it's optional. And finally, it's the caps for investors. $2,500 per issuer in the integrated model and only $1,500 per issuer on the startup model. And the one other thing is that the portals, everything would have to go through a portal. On the integrated model, they have to be registered. In the startup model, not really. Excuse me.
So just to clarify, sorry, Carlos, that would mean in that previous slide that any individual in the startup model, for example, couldn't invest more than $1,500 in a issue.
Exactly. Okay. But they don't have a cap, whereas in the integrated model, an issuer can put in $2,500 and in any one issuer with a maximum of $10,000 per year. So if you're, I wrote back to them and said, this is nonsense. If somebody is an accredited investor, why can't they invest $100,000? Right? So that's one of the things that they're trying to decide if multiple types of investors can be in here. But right now, those are the caps for a retail investor, definitely for a retail investor.
Thank you.
So these are the two maps of where the models are being accepted. As you can see in the map on the left, the one in red it's already in play. BC has put in the model, and the rest of the provinces in green have said that they will accept. On the right, it's the Ontario securities model. So the provinces are overlapping, the ones with Ontario and BC taking a hard line saying that they will not necessarily adopt the others' model. So what this means is that you've got two potentially very significantly different proposals. And if left as is, it will create a bifurcated crowdfunding regime. Well, the problem with that is that the success of crowdfunding is based on the accessibility of a large number of people. You as an issuer want to be able to reach across the country to reach as many investors as humanly possible. And as an investor, you want to be able to reach across the country to something that might be of interest to you in BC. If this goes through, then it becomes province-specific. And this has happened in the States. Right now, there are 16, 17 states that have created intrastate crowdfunding regimes, which are state-specific. Now, an example of this, if you go back to my previous slide, if you're looking at Saskatchewan, I live in Brampton, and between Brampton and Mississauga, we have a population that's greater than Saskatchewan combined. I know for a fact, I wouldn't, and this is no insult to Saskatchewan, I would not create a crowdfunding portal for 1.2 million people. It's not economically feasible, and I would not get quality pipelines coming through that. And so this is one of the issues that we've been raising to the securities regulators. The size of the market in the UK, it is currently, and this is as of February, I believe, $94 million, or not, sorry, I'm sorry, 94 million pounds. That's a 600% increase year over year. The UK is predominantly debt-based financing, and the ASOB, which stands for the Australian Small Scale Offering Board, which was one of the first countries to offer equity crowdfunding, has been running for the past 9 years and has had an 86% survival rate with 150 companies going through there. One of the problems that the Securities Commission is worried about is the OSC did a survey. Everybody said, oh, they totally expect to participate. And at the same time, they asked them, are you afraid of risk? And they said, yes, they were terribly afraid of risk. Well, crowdfunding is a high-risk proposition because there are no liquidity or exit options. So if you put in some money, there's no chance you'll ever get your money back. And also, the crowdfunding is just a small drop in the investment industry. It takes up less than 1%.
So related to that, you can just give us a quick update of the scale of the sector now?
Yep, that's where we're going. So right now, this is as of May, I'm sorry I couldn't get updated numbers for this year, but as of May 2014, there were 930 crowdfunding portals worldwide. And as you can see by the large one, that's the donation and product pre-sale crowdfunding portals that Christy was talking about. The smaller piece of the pies are all equity crowdfunding. To give you a quick idea of the scale in Europe, last week we had the CEO for our crowd in Israel come and speak at the crowdfunding seminar, and they've raised over $100 million in the last couple of years. Just to give you an idea, when I first did this is as of February 10th. When I did this in May or June last year, it was at 45 million. And all of these numbers across the board have expanded significantly. Crowdcube, for example, was 36 million. Anaxigo in France, which is brand new, I think it's just starting its second year. Last year when I did this was to 6.5 million euros. And in the States, the same sort of growth pattern. These are U.S. accredited investor equity crowdfunding portals. EquityNet, last year when I did this was approximately 231. Realty Mobile down at the bottom, which you're seeing at 367, last year was at $18 million raised. And Rock the Post last year was created last year, was at 30,600,000, and now it's at 111 million. And again, these numbers are as of February. So the current status, I kept that date up there as a bit of a joke. The September 23rd, 2013, that was when sorry, I stand corrected. It's not a joke. That's when the SEC allowed platforms to solicit funds, and that's when you see these numbers that I showed you in the previous slide take off. What the market has accomplished is, well, it's right there. You can see the staggering amount of money that's raised. Last year, I helped co-found the Equity Crowdfunding Alliance of Canada, and I'm also an advisor on the National Crowdfunding Alliance of Canada, which now includes the equity crowdfunding as an integral part of their platform. And I'm trying to get the two associations to talk to one another more frequently. On June 18th, as I said last year, I submitted the Mars comment period for a comment to the Ontario Securities Commission. The comments were collated, and hopefully the CSA will pick a path forward. And notice I've left this in a future tense, because my best guess at that time, this is when I wrote it in June, was September 2014. I'm now hoping that'll be September 2015 before the new rules come out. So, to give you an example of where we are, some of the success stories around the world. As you can see, there are staggering amounts of money flowing back and forth through these equity crowdfunding portals. I'm not going to discuss what you need to do to launch a successful campaign, because I thought Christy did an excellent job in laying it out for you, and she basically gutted my slides anyway. But for this group, there are clear examples of equity crowdfunding working for social-based enterprises. The CSI and their community bond. They were actually featured last week at the crowdfunding summit, because I wanted everybody to see that there was more than just tech and all the toys and whistles that were being highlighted. One of the ones that our crowd in Israel pointed out was Rewalk. It was a way for paraplegics to learn to be able to walk again using a special device. SolarShare has proven time and again that their model is something to pay attention to. We currently on the SVX also have a company called Eve Medical, who has designed a new device to help women in rural communities, or women who are not comfortable going to their doctor to do their HPV tests. CoPower, which is probably going to be on our, not probably, will be on our Quebec platform, is doing, it has created funds to help fund clean tech projects. This is the campaign, the summit I mentioned last week. It had 350 people show up or more. We had people speak from Europe, Israel, across Canada and the States. There were attendees from around the world. We had 60 speakers, and if you're looking for a resource, we have now compiled a 310-page document of all the slide decks from all the speakers, and it's available on the NCFA site, and it covers quite a bit of information. And I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pull up and let you guys,
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Carlos. That was a express overview of what's clearly a complicated landscape and quickly evolving topic. So we have a few minutes for questions and discussion. I'm going to continue to invite people. I think Debbie's posted a question or two here. Others can post questions. I'm going to unsync the presentation so participants can scroll back and forth through the slides and have another look at some of them that might have gone past too quickly. And I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of questions now, and then perhaps we can, I'll close off the formal webinar and we can stay on the line a bit later for other questions afterwards, because we don't have a lot of time. Debbie did ask, related to the donation reward side, the non-equity side of crowdfunding. I don't know if, Christy, you'd have a sense of what it is in the U.S. or Carlos as well, but when people make a donation to an organization that has charitable status, would they be eligible for an income tax receipt?
So the way it goes in the U.S. is yes, you are eligible. We looked into that quite a bit during our Action Learning program, working with some mostly nonprofits. What the what the advice we got was that you should send your own receipt as well, and if you're giving a reward that you know, based on the U.S. tax law, when you give something in return for a donation, you should let the person know what the estimated value, fair market value is for that item, and then it's up to the donor to file their taxes properly based on that. So even though, so like Kickstarter does not have a special program for nonprofits, it's just, you know, it's just based on projects. But if you happen to be a nonprofit and you're accepting the donation, you can send that charitable donation receipt in return for it. Indiegogo has a charitable donation, or like a nonprofit program where they give discounts, but I believe from what I just looked up, it's only for U.S. nonprofits, so that wouldn't work in the Canadian context. But so they give a discount to U.S. nonprofits on the fees that they charge, and in return they also process it through a nonprofit-oriented donation payment processor, and they send automatically a donation receipt for the U.S.-based community. But yeah, that's so I would say that you should double check with your own tax advisors as a nonprofit how you would handle it, but you may be able to just make sure you provide all of the donors with the appropriate receipts and still use it that way.
Yes, I think Tanya added in the chat box, and I think that's my understanding of the Canadian tax law as well. You have to deduct the fair market value of what's received, and then you can probably issue a receipt for the net value of the donation.
Yeah.
Were you going to add something, Carlos?
Nope. Tanya beat me to it.
Great. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was actually just going to, we're at the hour that we'd promised people, but we've only barely started the questions here. I know that Carlos and Christy can stay on a bit longer, so perhaps what I'll do is I'll just close out the formal portion of the webinar. Anyone who can stay longer to continue the discussion is welcome, but I'll close that off and turn off the recording then, and we'll continue with a more informal Q&A. So I'm just going to resync the presentation for some of these closing slides and say here, in addition, there are also some further links for more information to answer Cliff's question. We will be posting a webinar recording and a link to the slides, which you'll receive in an email after the session as soon as that's available. So I understand there was a lot of valuable information in there. If you'd like to learn more about the organizations and the presenters, follow some of these links, or if you want to stay in touch around CED-related issues, check out the CEDNet website or sign up for our newsletters. Also, you should have just received an email with a link to a 1-minute evaluation survey. Please take a second and fill it out right now. Your feedback is important to us. And many thanks to Christy and Carlos for sharing their unique perspective and experiences. Thank you to all the participants for your questions and participation. And so for those who need to leave, take care. And those who would like to continue the conversation, please stay online, and we'll continue the questions and discussion for